Hello, everyone, and welcome to this fireside chat with Forrester and One Identity. This is the second part of our conversation with Forrester around the renaissance that we see around the zero trust approach to security. So today we're going to review some of the core tenets of zero trust, examine some misconceptions that have taken root in the decades since Forrester first introduced the concept. My name is Alan Radford. I am a technology strategist here at One Identity, and I'm very pleased to be joined here today by Cosmin Dragu, who is an engineering manager for identity access management at IKEA Group, who we're very pleased to have as a customer of One Identity. Cosmin, welcome today.
Thank you.
And also from Forrester, we have Heidi Shea. Heidi is principal analyst. Her research focuses on data security and privacy strategy, and she helps guide clients in applying zero trust and data-centric approach to securing data. Heidi, welcome to you as well.
Thank you.
So let's kick things off. I'm just going to come straight into it and mention that 2009 I think is when Forrester first introduced the concept of zero trust, which a phrase that always stuck in my mind is that it was based on a realization that traditional security models operated on the outdated assumption that everything inside an organization's network should be trusted. And given in 2009 that was an outdated assumption, I think we can all agree, our viewers included, that the world has moved on since then. Digital transformation is in full swing and ongoing. And really that leads to what are the common misconceptions around zero trust that we need to be bearing in mind on this digital journey that we're all on, Heidi?
I think so, because I think originally we thought about this trusted versus untrusted network, and a lot of the focus early on with zero trust was really about, I think, how we thought about the network and things like network segmentation and taking away this notion of trust. And that's still something that I think continues on today. Sometimes we run into these misconceptions that it's still very much focused on the network and network security. And it's still a core concept, but it's zero trust as a concept has evolved to something that's much broader than that. It's a whole framework, it's a whole ecosystem of controls and integration these days.
And I'd like to bat that same ball over to you, if I may, Cosmin. What's your take on zero trust and some of the misconceptions you've encountered?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I see myself and IKEA as well. We see it as a more dynamic environment which we're transforming into, and so that dynamic environment requires dynamic thinking, and so we cannot really. It's difficult to attack that problem in a static way, like we used to with static rules and static roles and static access. We need to think beyond that, having an ever-changing, iterative approach to this dynamic environment.
So before I come back to Heidi, let me drill down into that a bit more, Cosmin, if I may, because I'm hearing dynamic, I'm hearing a need for not static. In the conversations we've had with customers from One Identity's perspective, there's users in motion, there's applications in motion, there's data in motion, and all of it is being virtualized in cloud, automated. There's a huge amount of elasticity across all of those entities. And so the need for the policies themselves to be dynamic, as you allude to, has become so important across the whole cybersecurity ecosystem. And so I'd be keen to get an understanding of what some key challenges that you've observed, Cosmin, perhaps in how IKEA have responded to this concept and how you approach zero trust from your perspective.
Yeah, sure. One example would be how we think about data, and how do we use data analytics, correlation of logs, policy engines, machine learning to be able to take fast and good, appropriate decisions based on this context switching, if that makes sense. That's one of the key concepts there for us at IKEA. Secondly, I would like to point out the importance of having a great or good leadership that can translate these concepts into actionable items, as I would like to put it. We can talk a lot about zero trust. We can talk around PowerPoints and boxes and arrows. To be honest, we can do that all day, but at the end of the day, we have to move. We have to do something, and for every day that we wait, we kind of lose our an opportunity to move the needle in the right direction, so to say. So the ability to execute in an iterative approach is very, very important to us.
So I'm hearing high frequency of switching of context and needing to keep on top on an ever-changing context. The ability for leadership to translate these inputs into actionable items and then execute against those actionable items. Heidi, may I back that over to you? And so sort of reiterating the question around some challenges around organizations have responded to this concept. How does what Cosmin say resonate with yourself?
I think one of the key things that Cosmin was talking about here was that iterative approach, the translation into action. This all points to one of the common challenges that we see, and I think also maybe one of the myths that we encounter as well, where people assume that this is zero trust. It's a project. You do it, you're done. But no, it's certainly not the case. It's iterative. It's a journey with this approach that you take, and there may be some quick wins that you can get immediately in terms of actions that you take. Sometimes we see that in the form of companies enabling multi-factor authentication, for example, as a potential quick win, just to say we're moving the needle here before we start doing some other things that take a little bit more time, more long term. But it's its whole mindset, I think. That's exactly what's being pointed out here, is that it is this journey. You plot out your roadmap. It's a part of a strategy that you are continuously iterating on, marching down this path for. And I think one of the things that come into mind here is also when we think about how do we talk to the business about this, how do we, get stakeholder buy-in, it's being able to articulate the strategy and how it unfolds over time and where you're making those investments. The way that I like to think about it is it's like you have X amount of budget and resources, right? And let's say you're going grocery shopping and this is your grocery budget, and your goal is to eat more healthy, right? So with that in mind, the decisions that you're making for what you're purchasing, you just keep that in mind. Maybe more fruits, more vegetables, less processed foods of what's going into your cart. But that's the sort of the mindset going into it.
So I'd like to drill down into that a bit more, if I may, Heidi. You talk about strategy, getting stakeholder buy-in. I like grocery analogy, especially when we're trying to move other more financial needles. But I'd like to ask you about security leadership, how maybe you've observed security leaders get buy-in for zero trust within their organizations, and how Forrest has helped there.
I think there are a number of ways. It really depends on where you might be starting with trying to get this buy-in. I've seen that in some organizations, if there's some misconception at the highest levels of what zero trust even is, then you're at a very different starting point of trying to get buy-in versus having leadership that may have already kind of heard of the concept and sort of understands what it is. So for those who maybe they're less familiar with this notion of zero trust and their mind jumps to the point about, what do you mean we're not trusting employees? You're starting at a different point of trying to almost like educate them about what this actually is in terms of a concept of an approach. And it's not about trusting people. That's not what zero trust is about, or not trusting people. We're talking more about packets here in terms of where the trust is. And then other ways of getting buy-in, I think, as you get further down that path to be able to point out what are some of the business benefits of it beyond just security. I think some of the things we've seen that are more successful is when you can directly tie this into how does this impact the employee and the employee experience. And in some cases, this could be about how Zero Trust helps to create a better employee experience because you can tie it into things like, well, maybe now this helps to support your bring your own device program. You're doing things that may enable employees to more easily work remotely or work from anywhere because now they're accessing data in a slightly different way based on your approach. Maybe you're getting rid of VPN, so there's less friction, for example.
So with that need for speed and elasticity that we've been talking about, it sounds like there's actually an opportunity to use a zero trust framework as an enabler, where if we think in terms of so one principle around zero trust is the idea of least privilege. If I as an employee am in a least privilege model, the speed at which I gain the privileges that I need to do my job has an impact on my ability to execute and has an impact on my happiness, because user experience is increasingly important these days, especially in the world of cybersecurity. And so I wonder in that context, Cosmin, whether that's matched with some of your observations at IKEA, and in that context, sort of batting over to you a little bit, if I may, a similar question in how perhaps people have brought you into buying into Zero Trust and how respectively you've managed to gain buy-in from your superiors into Zero Trust, and whether the employee journey fits into that.
Yeah, difficult questions. First of all, it's I think just before I start answering that, I would just like to point out that it is a moving target. It's the inputs and the variables are changing or slightly varying over time, and I think it's difficult for leaders to keep up with those changes. First of all, there's a lot of knowledge and understanding and that goes into that. I mean, technical understanding, but also the term itself, zero trust, is quite abstract. I mean, if you just lay it out there, zero trust, what is that actually? So I think all of us, you know, in all stages and all positions within the company, we need to get to a point where we have a similar understanding or a similar level of competency around what zero trust is on a conceptual level, and then once we get there, we can, you know, we can kind of speak the same language and start discussing our needs and try to prioritize and build a strategy around that. That is easier said than done, I would say. It's mostly has to do with conflicting priorities in the organization. Zero trust is not the only one. As you know, I'm being honest here, it's not the only one. There are many priorities that need to be balanced, and so yeah, I would say training, communication, information to everyone, and then your second question was about the user experience, I believe. Yeah, we're focusing on that a lot, because if we cannot change the security without the end user in mind, which should be one of the most important pieces of this. If the zero trust cannot be used in reality, what's the point? Have we really achieved anything then? So it has to be a valuable or value-based goals towards the user experience and how they perceive this new experience with conditions and this dynamic environment that I'm talking about. So leadership, absolutely, the ability to execute, but also always with the end user in mind.
So let me ask you this, Cosmin. For IKEA, is user experience a separate initiative to Zero Trust with a dotted line between them, or is user experience a part of your Zero Trust initiative?
Yeah, it's a part of. Yes, for sure. It's in focus. So we need to be conscious about that. The value is on the end user side. The value is on protecting the assets and information, but we cannot do that without having an end user in mind and their experience in all of this. Yes, 100%.
Okay. And before I back over to Heidi, I'd also like to ask Cosmin, mentioned earlier about good leadership being able to translate actionable items for a Zero Trust initiative. And you can probably see where I'm coming with this question. If one of those actionable items is user experience, part of that's going to be defining, well, what do you mean by user experience? What do we want to achieve, etc., and so on. But I'd be interested to know, what are some of the other actionable items that have come from your Zero Trust initiative?
Oh, there are many. So we can translate Zero Trust concepts into objectives or goals for ourselves. And then those objects will have to be broken down into various disciplines like devices and networking and applications and data and all these components, asking ourselves, what does that mean? I mean, we have the Zero Trust concept, but what does it mean for me representing identity, or what does it mean for a device team in that context? So I think we need to learn to ask better questions, ask ourselves, and have this dialogue in between teams at the company of, how do you see this? What does this mean for you? How are you prioritizing? How do you groom your backlogs? What do you pull in and what do you leave out? And those kind of questions.
So I'm hearing that there are siloed teams, and one of the challenges perhaps around the Zero Trust initiative I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just using a bit of insight here, but it sounds like there are separate siloed teams, their own cultures, their own responsibilities, their own requirements, and their own stakeholders. And it sounds like one of the challenges around Zero Trust is bridging the gaps between those silos. Is that a fair observation?
100%. Doesn't necessarily have to be silos, but it could be a lack of clearly defined objectives, let's say. Devices versus identity, for example. Does the device teams have the same priorities, or do we interpret the same objectives in the same way? So just having a dialogue and ask ourselves the questions. What do you mean by that? How do you derive the work that needs to be done from this object statement?
So Heidi, what are some of the questions that we can feed to Cosmin then for his teams?
I mean, I think one of the key things that come to mind is, how are you doing this sort of, is it information sharing? Is that the right way of phrasing it? But as you're trying to work out this type of collaboration between teams to understand what this group is trying to achieve, given this objective for Zero Trust versus another one, how does that whole process look like? Is this a monthly meeting or some other type of collaboration happening?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's I would say it's a collaboration. It's a, let's call it a monthly meeting. It could be a monthly meeting, and the content of that is, how do we time, in a timeline, how do we align our various roadmaps or our various goals, so that we at least try to do the same things at the same time to get the wanted outcome. I guess a bad example of that would be, let's say I'm putting my device ownership hat here on, and I'm saying, yes, this is the device for the future. Okay, I turn around to the identity team. How will you secure my device, this modern device here, in the Zero Trust ecosystem? Well, here's the way I'm going to do it, but I really don't have time now for Q1 and Q2. So is there a point in me as a device person here working on putting a lot of efforts into making sure I find the perfect device here, but it doesn't have the identity capabilities. Do you understand? So it needs to be coordinated in a way, in a dialogue between these teams, application, devices, networking, to make sure that we do things at the same time, more or less. So yeah.
So I heard application teams, device teams, networking teams, identity
Mm-hmm.
teams. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Yes.
how many teams are we talking here, Cosmin? An organization like IKEA having these disparate teams meeting monthly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say roughly maybe 15.
Okay. And around these 15
Yeah.
teams, alignment must be
Mm-hmm.
quite a challenge because each one of those 15 teams has their own moving parts.
Yes.
But it sounds like the some part of the importance of the leadership steer is aligning the business drivers across those teams, so that everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When it comes to zero trust, and we look at the identity management hymn sheet, as it were, what are some of the tenets that you look for there from an identity perspective?
That is to
Yes.
me. Yes. The question was what tenets were you looking
Yeah.
for?
So when it comes to identity management and zero trust, what are some of the business drivers that you are challenged by when it comes to identity specifically?
Oh, yes. So one of the examples could be the modern cloud ecosystem and the non-cloud ecosystem. How do we tie those together? How do we have a continuous data flow in between those? Because it's easier to build zero trust, at least according to me and us, around modern cloud environments, because there's engines there and there's machine learning and everything is there more or less. However, our more data-centric landscape doesn't really have those capabilities. So how do we tie those together? How do we take decisions in our modern environments catering for everything, or not so modern environments as well? That's one of the challenges we have.
So when it comes to the,
Tying those two
I'll pick
together.
on the data-centric landscape if I may, and I'll bat this over to yourself, Heidi. When it comes to the data-centric landscape, zero trust is of itself a data-centric way of thinking. So when it comes to the drivers around the identity management side of zero trust, and we look through the lens of the data-centric piece, what advice can we give Cosmin there?
Yeah, and that's a great question. It's one that I don't think has clear answers as well. From what I've seen, that we talk about it in terms of being data centric, right? But the actual focus on the data controls, the data pillar, I guess, of zero trust is still a huge challenge for organizations, and one where I see companies almost looking at it last, unfortunately. And that could be for a number of reasons. One, because they feel like they have at least some type of control in place. They've stopped the bleeding. Maybe it's good enough for compliance. So they tend to focus on other components of zero trust before coming back to this data pillar of controls. But I think if we're trying to think about what can we do more here to push the needle forward as we're working on these other parts of it, is so much of what might be controls for your data, I think, are turning up as features of other solutions that you're using today, whether it is within these data repositories or other tools in your environment. So I always encourage people to take a look at what do you already have there that maybe you haven't enabled or are not using to its fullest ability at this point in time, and see if that could be something that uplifts your posture just a little bit more as you're working on these other pieces. And also look to see where some of those potential integrations may be with those control tools. So this could be your something that's on premise or some other tool that you're using for data security, or one of those cloud repositories where you have data today.
So in terms of cloud, There is a quote from Forrester that I would like to surface for you, Cosmin, if I may, which was that transformational projects, such as supporting a hybrid workforce and moving to the cloud, are perfect for energizing your zero trust plans. And as Heidi just alluded to, compliance initiatives are another secret weapon to accelerate your move towards zero trust. Cosmin, what are your thoughts on what Heidi's just presented, and also in that quotation?
What comes into mind, first of all, is that I don't think we should see zero trust as a compliance-driven initiative, if that makes sense. It needs to be a security-driven security. And then compliance, probably could be of a, secondary to that. That's my short answer.
I think you've made Heidi happy.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, I realize that. Yep.
Heidi, would you like to respond?
Oh, no, just it's like, yes, like this is the ideal, right? Because you're not doing zero trust because you want to be compliant. It's for security. And being compliant is a nice side effect of it all.
So what I'd infer from the quote from Forrester, and I agree with you both, but it does infer that potentially a failed audit can actually help accelerate a zero trust initiative. But surely we don't want to have failed audits. Surely the point is that we want to avoid having a failed audit. I've had many conversations with CISOs who would actually advocate a failed audit as an opportunity. If we fail an audit, that's an opportunity to increase investment to drive our cybersecurity initiative harder than we've been driving it, and resulting in the failed audit in the first place. And I suppose what I'm trying to say by bringing that up is that, are failed audits an opportunity for zero trust? Open question for the room.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I think we should see failures as opportunities at all times, including audits and maybe security incidents and everything in between. So yes, absolutely. There's an opportunity to get that extra buy-in if needed. Yeah.
So I'll play devil's advocate now. Should we wait for a failed audit?
No, absolutely not. And that's where I would like to come back to the actionable items again. Do we want to miss out on the opportunities day by day, week by week, month by month, on not doing anything, or doing very little, or having the wrong priorities, or do we want to actually say, yes, let's go? This is what this is your trust. It hopefully by now it's somewhat clear. It's been out there for a while, and we can sort of look at the same image and the same needs, and say, okay, let's go. And back to what Heidi was saying before, maybe MFA, maybe two-factor authentication is our initial first step in that direction. So let's go execute.
Heidi, your thoughts?
Oh, about the field audits? We've seen that as a driver to kickstart a focus on zero trust. I've also seen big breaches as something that gets companies to really rethink their strategy around security, and at that point they start looking at zero trust more seriously as well. It could be any number of things. Overall of the program, or maybe a new CISO comes into the organization and takes a look and says, we need to change things. So there's a number of different drivers that could be there, but it doesn't have to be a field audit. In some organizations, I've seen how they see how quickly they are accelerating to the cloud and recognize that they need to rethink their approach to security in this more modern world.
So Heidi, in the first of these, so this is the second in our webinar series. In the first one, you were kind enough to give us an overview of some of the new insights from Forrester in the new zero trust framework, and there were 3 core principles in that zero trust framework, which were around entities being untrusted by default, least privileged access being enforced, and comprehensive security monitoring being implemented around 3 core principles. But my question, having said that, is this: if I'm a new CISO or I'm part of a security team and I need to lead a security initiative and I don't want to wait for a failed audit, I'm aware that challenges need to be addressed. I may even be able to articulate some of the opportunities inherent in using security as an enabler. My question to you is this: what advice can we give to security leaders in how to use zero trust as a lightning rod to get buy-in from the business to move our strategies forward?
So I think in that kind of approach, new person coming in, trying to get further buy-in for the program, it's almost like tie that back into this notion where this is really your journey. In some cases, it could be a complete transformative type of journey for the organization. But to figure out what that looks like, this is a great opportunity just to take stock of where you are today as a company with your security practices, and almost like advocating for an assessment of sorts of your maturity on this zero trust journey, and see where some of those gaps may be as a way of helping to develop what does this roadmap forward look like? Where can you get the most uplift with the efforts that you put in to try to get that stakeholder buy-in and to really lay out a path of what's next to come, so that you can point to what some of the benefits may be by doing those things for your program.
And Cosmin, back to you. I appreciate that we've visited this question already in this webinar. We've come back a couple of times to actionable items from leadership. But I want to dive a little bit deeper, if I may, in terms of taking those actionable items into a strategy and, as Heidi says, into a roadmap. So in collecting those actionable items, that enabled you to build a business case. But as you've already stated, it's not as simple as that. It's an ongoing journey. And part of that ongoing journey at IKEA is that monthly meeting across teams to continue that alignment. So is it fair to say that that monthly meeting actually involves a roadmap review of sorts?
For sure, yes, absolutely, and also strategy review. Like I said before, it's a moving target, and the clearer we can define these guardrails, you shouldn't go too far on the left, not too far on the right. Let's keep this, track. Let's keep it in the middle here, and try to put our efforts and our bandwidth, our limited bandwidth, on these things. And having 5 things, it's probably a lot better than 50, because it's easy to derive 50 things from a large, from a big challenge like zero trust is actually. So yeah.
So I'm hearing that zero trust is not easy.
No, it's not. On paper it is, in a PowerPoint slide it definitely is. And prioritizing the right things is challenging. Scoping is another one. Leadership. What else? And also something that I didn't bring up earlier, but it's the maybe ask yourself the question: does your team or your area or your organization have the right conditions to shift the mentality and the mindset towards, quite a significant modernization and thinking, which to me zero trust is a lot about. So education, skills, competencies, there's a lot that goes into that, not only technology.
That's a great point. So I'd like to use that, if I may, Cosmin, to ask about the roadmap. When you started bringing these teams together, how long did it take for what I'll describe as version 1.0 of the roadmap to form. How long did that process take for IKEA?
Oh, we're talking about months, years, I would say, because it's changing. It's very fluid. That's how we work. I mean, I'm throwing out agile again there. So we're trying to steer depending on the situations and the priorities that we have in front of us. And the cadence that we have today is tertial based. So we're reviewing that 3 times a year by default, and we have monthly reviews and yearly reviews and everything in between. But it took 12 plus months.
Okay,
Yes.
so with getting these 15 teams together, it took over a year to get to an initial roadmap stage, to mature to a point where a roadmap was agreed and moving.
Yeah, and it's still. I mean, we're never done. we're always adapting and evolving in those discussions, and sometimes it's 10 teams, sometimes it's 2, 3, or 20. Depends on the objectives that we set. There are a lot of dependencies. Networking is dependent on identity, and identity is dependent on networking, and applications are dependent on both, and so on. So there's a lot that goes into that, and just planning takes time.
So with these 15 teams, would you say that these 15 teams are now in agreement on this roadmap? I appreciate that's a I appreciate that might be an awkward question.
No, I honestly I don't think so. I'm being honest here. I don't think so. I think it's an I lost the word here. It's evolving. We're learning, and we learn to ask better questions, and I think we have to be somewhat humble.
And so, do those 15 teams agree that the Zero Trust Initiative has been worth it?
Yes, it is worth it. It sort of paints the a utopia almost, if I may joke a little bit. It's if you look at that PowerPoint slide with all these great, this is where we want to be. It's very futuristic, and it's a vision almost. So, but we agree that needs to be done. To what extent, when, how much? That's a continuous discussion.
That's really, really helpful for our listeners. Thank you, Cosmin. So Heidi, may I back over to you and ask you, based on what Cosmin's just said in terms of timeframes, complexity, number of teams involved, scale, what are your observations here in terms of how this measures up against other conversations you've had with other Forrester clients? Is this normal? Are we all living in normality by thinking to ourselves, wow, okay, it's hard but worth it, but if we invest this amount of time, then it is a worthwhile exercise, as IKEA have discovered? Is this normal?
It is, and I think what Cosmin's described is pretty typical of large organizations. It does take that amount of time, that kind of effort, at least just to even get it sort of going into a place where you keep iterating. Because as he's mentioned, it's more than just a technology thing. There's people, there's process, there's change management is a big component of this, on top of the even just laying out what does that strategy look like for the company. Because now at that point you've got that North Star and you're getting everyone aligned to keep working towards that direction. And I know we've talked a lot about challenges and trying to get teams together throughout this conversation, and I recognize how that might sound really daunting to people listening in, thinking maybe, oh my gosh, should we even attempt something like this as an organization? Because now they see the different kinds of pain points and challenges associated with it. And to that, I would also encourage people to take a step back, because Zero Trust, it's a good practices for a lot of this. There are things and there's components for Zero Trust that organizations are already doing today, even though they may not be calling it Zero Trust or specifically on this zero trust journey. They are doing pieces of it as a company. And what zero trust can help with is really bringing that together under an umbrella of an approach that enables them to make smarter decisions about their security investments, about what they're actually doing so that they are going towards this North Star and avoiding what we call expense and depth as you're making investments and putting your efforts in all these different places without thinking, well, what is that ultimate vision that you are lining up with?
Cosmin, your thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, it could be overwhelming. Definitely. I mean, it's you see a big mountain in front of you, and how do you climb that big mountain? It's one step at a time. So, whenever you see opportunities, maybe ask yourself the question: what I'm about to do here or execute here, does it get us closer to this vision, to our North Star, whatever that means for your company in the zero trust context? And if the answer is yes, then maybe you should take that step. And maybe it turns out, months later that it was not perfect. It may not have been the right thing to do then. Okay, then learn from it and make better decisions next time. So what I'm trying to say is maybe not fear to fail. Back to what you were saying before, it's not a project. You will never be done. So it's just a matter of keep the momentum and go.
So that sounds like great advice for other organizations, regardless of size, in how to take, or things to bear in mind to take their own zero trust initiatives forward. With a wry smile, I'll ask you this, Cosmin. How would you summarize zero trust in a single sentence? Please.
Can I give an analogy? Climate change. Yeah. It's how do we know what the right things are, that can have the most impact? We have an idea, but we don't really know for sure. So we have to do something right now. We have to start doing things, to tackle climate change. And I think it can be overwhelming to think about that. But back to what I was saying before, just start somewhere, and if it feels right, then do it, and evaluate later and change course if needed.
I like it. Thank you. Heidi, same question. Zero trust in a single sentence.
It's an approach and a mindset, and more than technology.
What I've taken away from today, to throw my own on the table, is that it's hard, but worth it. And that seems to be a consensus across the board. It's not people, it's not process, it's not technology. To your point, Heidi, it's a mindset and it's an approach, but a mountain worth climbing for sure. So with that, thank you both very much for your time today. And I think that's where we'll leave it. Thank you.
Thank you as well. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you.